All right, so like I was saying, your biomechanics are going to be related to how well you can move your body. So this is your body over here. So this is going to have a big influence on what you're able to do in your delivery. Obviously, you can tell it to do different things, but it's still dependent on what it's capable of doing, right? Okay, so we need to understand this because this might be a lot of your challenges to do what you want over here, okay? So as a coach, it wouldn't be the best way to tell you to do something that the coach doesn't know even if you have the ability to do it. And a lot of times you get frustrated as a pitcher because you're trying to do something and it's not happening. And then you don't know why, and it could be just that you don't have the ability. You haven't built the ability into your body, okay? So if we look at mobility, this is where we're gonna start. Your trunk rotation on your left side is super tight, on your right side it's tight. What that means is as your hips open, you're gonna wanna keep your shoulders closed. That allows us to delay the end to push more energy up. The more we delay the end, just like a whip, the more we push energy up. You're gonna be a little restricted there. So you're gonna try to delay, either two things are gonna happen. Either you're not gonna be able to delay, or you're gonna keep your hips delayed too long, and then you're not gonna really get power coming up, enough power coming up. So we really want as much room there as we can. Hip abduction's tight, so like this movement, that's important because when we rotate in sequence, hip rotation, trunk rotation, when we go through that sequence, we're transferring energy. To throw hard, we want to delay that sequence. We don't want to be like a hitter and just start rotating. We want to, I mean, even hitters do it too, but we have more time here. We want to get down the mound before rotation. So to do that, we have to sit in that lateral position as long as we can. And you're a little tight there, so what it means is you're going to go to try to take time down the mound, and you're going to hit into range, and you're going to want to rotate too early. Or you're just not going to rotate at all. You're not going to rotate the lower half, and then your upper half's going to do the work. And that's important because studies show if your lower half doesn't build the rotational and linear forces, your upper half has to do it. And you don't want that. You don't want the upper half to create the rotational linear forces. You want it to receive those forces, right? You want it to be more reactive than active. So you're gonna be able to challenge there. Ankles are weak, tight and weak. Hip internal's tight, hip internal, external. So not a lot of femur mobility. And that's gonna affect how you sequence and rotate because these femurs turn the pelvis. Your hip flexion's tight. So you have a lot of tightness on your left side. Have you had any injuries on your left side?
I don't think so. Well, I had a shoulder injury, but nothing leg-wise.
Yeah. So it could be an alignment thing. Like you could ask Pat he's at Cairo. You can look at your skeletal alignment. Your hips flexion's tight. So that means as your trunk goes forward, it's gonna hit into range pretty quick. And that's gonna restrict velocity because 86% of the energy that gets to the ball comes from the trunk. So if we prevent the trunk from carrying a good distance, we're gonna slow down the energy to the ball. Or we're gonna reduce the energy to the ball. Hip extension. So if you are able to get a full stride, which we can see a lot of challenges to even get a full stride, if you even get there, you're gonna have a hard time extending your hip to get your hip pelvis open. So I think a lot of your problems right now are mobility. Big challenges on your mobility that we need to work on. And these are all things we work on and get better. We would want to reevaluate in 2 weeks and see progression starting. As far as your athleticism, your grip strength is weak for your age. And that's important because your body's not going to want to throw mid to upper 80s when the torques are enough to destroy the elbow when you're not strong enough to compress those forces. So we definitely need more upper body strength. Your pelvis rotation your rotational speeds aren't too bad, probably average, a little below average. Your verts are below average. You have good size, but we need to be more explosive with that. Your strengths, for that size, your strengths are below average, speed's below average. Your pelvic stability is good. Like, you probably have good core stability, pelvic stability, that's good. It's just, so basically you can cover ground, you're just not explosive and you're tight in the movements of the kinetic chain. So here's the thing, I don't even think you should over obsess about mechanics. You need to build this better because this is like your car. It's like a lot of times you can take a great driver and just give him a better car and then he's awesome. That's really where you are right now. We need to take what you've already been doing and we just need to build your car to be more mobile, more explosive. That alone will be a huge transformation for you. That's really what you need to focus on right now. Now let's go through your mechanics, just so we can see what's going on and see if we see a lot of evidence, same evidence. So coming out of leg lift, you can see right here, you start to drive your back leg. So that shin angle is so vertical at that point. Once again, that's that hip abduction tightness you have. You know, an elite guy literally can just ride it. They can ride it like all the way down here, right? You're stopping about halfway because you're hitting into range, and then you're trying to get out of that position, and it's not a position to really do much because it's too vertical. So your push kind of just keeps you moving up as opposed to down and out. Okay. So then when you get to front foot, not a lot of propulsion in your back leg. In your back leg, because the back leg, studies show, is what powers hip rotation. Why? Because your front leg needs to lay closed to be a good block, a good break, because that's what it's supposed to do. So if your leg's landing closed, then how are you going to rotate your hip if you have to keep your front leg closed? You're going to have to push through the backside. That's why the studies show it's so important to propelling hip rotation. So you can see at this point, your trunk, your glove is already starting to open, and your hips are trying to open. I would just bet there's not a lot of power behind them. Let's see. So this is called your kinematic sequence. This is how things are sequencing: pelvis, trunk, arm, between foot plant, maximum external rotation, ball release, which are these lines here. So if we look here, right at foot plant, let's get the blue off there, right there. Your pelvis and trunk are at this. Your trunk's actually faster than your pelvis. It should be the other way around. So you have, your hips are opening, but also is your trunk. We have to counter those movements, just like a whip. If I took a whip and I threw it all together, wouldn't do the work as if I threw the end back as I threw the handle forward. That's the counter, right? So we have to counter the body the same way. We have to go this way with the hips, this way with the trunk, right? That's why you see this in elite guys. As this is coming through, this is loading up. It's like they're coiling up and loading their gun. That's not happening. You've got everything going together. And if you just watch on the video, see that pelvis turning red? That means it's peaking. And it is peaking just before your trunk. So there's a slight delay, but barely. And your trunk's peaking well into rotation, which means it's probably not even gonna move forward. And if I watch here, my pelvis rotation peaks right there. So somewhere in between landing and maximum external rotation. You want it to be way closer to the landing. So let's see how well those angles start pushing forward. Because at the end of the day, the more the trunk pushes towards the target, the more energy funnels to the target, right? 86% of the energy goes to the ball, comes in the trunk. Most of the torques generated in the movement of the body for the velocity come from the trunk. So if you look at trunk and legs, trunk flexion at maximum external rotation, the angle of trunk flexion, the moment of maximum external rotation, which we can see here, is 1 degree. So if this is 0 degrees of trunk flexion, this is 90, you're at 1 degree. An elite guy is gonna be at 45 degrees. Now, once again, do you have the mobility working against that? Yeah, a lot of your mobility is fighting that. Why is that important? I always talk about the runway analogy. If I have a jet, like an F-18 trying to get to 165, because that's when it takes off, the amount of distance I give it is strongly correlated to its ability to get to that speed. For example, if I gave it half the distance of what it needed, it's only going to be able to accelerate half its ability. Now, just because I give you more distance doesn't mean you're going to accelerate more. You still have to have the engine, the horsepower to do it, and that's your verts and everything. But right now, you gave it 1 degree. You gave it 1 degree of distance to travel energy forward or push energy towards the target. So we know you're limiting your potential kinetic energy. But once again, what does the trunk do? It just reacts to the lower half. So if the lower half, if the lower half just kind of does this, the trunk just kind of does that. The lower half does this, the trunk does this, right? So when we see that, we know the lower half failed to power the trunk. And that's what's powering the ball, okay? So we've got to work on the anatomy, we've got to work on the explosiveness, we've got to start to load these angles. The force vector. The shin has to come down, get linear towards a long stride, pushing center of mass forward, right? The back leg's the only leg on the ground. It's the propeller. You got to get the propeller aimed, and you got to get it pushing against the center of mass to start throwing the energy that way. Yours never came. It stayed here. You just kind of went like this, and then your trunk just kind of followed that energy. Okay. Over here, you had really good lift. Like I find a lot of guys that finish at high release points don't have good spin efficiency. You did, yeah, you had very good spin efficiency, which is pronation. So somehow you pronate really well. Could be just good, upper body timing, sequencing. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how accurate that is, but you want 20 inches of lift is impressive. So if we could get our velos to 90, and that's 2021, that's pretty elite. So right now your spin looks great. You just don't have the velo. You don't have the velo because you don't have the mobility and you don't have the power. We get the mobility, we get the power, and then you start putting it to work, making it dynamic and taking advantage of it. Then you're going to see those velos that you want.